EMR Provider Workflow. In this video, we're going to walk through the typical workflow of a provider. These steps are, of course, very situational and highly localized based on each practice, based on your patient population, your specialty, and doctor preferences. For modular level details of the various features, please remember to watch the individual videos here on the Resource Center. We've also got other workflow-oriented videos for front office and back office. Initially, there is the user profile setup. One distinction for provider setup versus others is that it does require a software license, and this is applicable for all of your medical providers, MD, DO, as well as mid-level, such as physician assistants and nurse practitioners. As regards the actual workflow and the way the doctor reviews the patient intake details, there are various ways of doing this, and that will vary based on your workflow. So we're just going to touch on all of those options. Then when the doctor actually interacts and performs review of systems, physical exam, drawings or diagrams, if that's part of your workflow, in-house procedures, your assessment and plan and evaluation and management coding, orders, and then ultimately reviewing the progress note and closing the encounter. So I'm going to toggle into Prognosis. I am logged in here as Dr. Cooper, and on my schedule today I notice that my patient Jessica Pearson is currently ready for doctor when I look at my status, and she's here for a burn follow-up. So I'm simply going to click on her to open the chart and start my documentation. Now notice, since Jessica is a return patient, it is automatically opening to my last encounter's progress note so that I can quickly refamiliarize myself with the last time I saw her. I can look through all of my notes, remind myself of what I had told her to do prior to this visit and what my plan of care was so that I can pick up where I left off. This, of course, is one option, and this is for your return patients. If it was a brand new patient, instead of opening here, it would have launched by default your default face sheet. Now, the default face sheet is typically where the patient intake is going to input all of their medical history, current medications, allergies, and so on. There, of course, again, are alternatives based on your workflow, whether you're using the patient portal and the patient fills out this paperwork in advance from the patient form. Maybe you use a doctor form in your practice to populate this information. So it's going to be a matter of which one of those workflows applies as to where you want to go to review your intake details. You can quickly review it at this level, remembering, of course, that that yellow color means it's been brought forward from history from that patient's other visits. The green color means it was just newly updated as of this visit. So you can differentiate there what was new information in today's intake versus what was already there on the patient's chart. Now, a third option would be to have a custom face sheet based on your workflow preferences. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my provider workflow info, which is a sample of a custom worksheet. Now, this, of course, being a custom face sheet, is 100% modifiable and customizable to your liking. So this is just an example where we've decided that we want to review our previous impression and plan only. So we don't want to go into the entire progress note. We just want to look at our assessment and plan from the last visit. Today's HPI, in this example, of course, we're just recording today's pain levels. Maybe you're dealing with injuries and wounds, and so you're concerned with today's pain levels compared to history. Maybe as a dermatologist, you want to see something different, such as skin coloration changes and whatnot. So this is extremely customizable based on what you would like to see before you start today's visit. We've also, of course, at the bottom here have an example where you can have a history of their previous procedures and radiologies, consultations you've ordered, and so on. And then the fourth option I mentioned was doctor form. So if you are using doctor forms in your practice, this is, again, just a generic example of one. It opens to the review of systems and physical examination piece because that's typically where a doctor will start after you've decided to review the patient intake. But we do have a link up here to look at the intake information. So, for instance, I can come in here and review my HPI data that the medical assistant entered during intake. I can review the vital signs. And then I can simply start my examination. And all of the doctor's interaction then could be done from this single window solution. So whichever one of those options works for you, it has the same result in the end. So I'm going to just go back here to my last encounter progress note since we're working with a follow-up patient and assume that this is your typical workflow because it is one that we see frequently in our physician practices. So Dr. Cooper's opened up Jessica's chart, reviewed everything that happened on her last visit, and is ready to start today's visit. Now in our demonstration, we're going to use the template approach rather than the doctor form. So we're starting here by looking at today's vitals. And notice now down at the bottom, I have these green workflow arrows. This, of course, is discussed in our defining workflow video on the Resource Center, and these arrows are simply just defining the screen sequence that works for you for that scenario so that you can quickly navigate through the documentation process. In an office visit, for instance, you're going to have different screens than from a new patient, where you may have a more extensive workup and need more screens involved. Maybe even within your workflow, you do dictation. You'll notice over here on the far left, we do have an option called Dictate Transcribe. Maybe you use some sort of oral dictation such as Dragon. We do have a separate video, of course, that discusses that workflow. So whatever is working within your practice is supported in this workflow stream. So we're just going to simply navigate on now to our HPI, see what was discussed with the patient during intake on her burn. If I need to make any additional changes now while I'm interviewing the patient, maybe she forgot to tell the MA that she had another symptom. Maybe I just want to add something else. I have that option. I can, of course, put my additional notes down here during my discussion and then move on to my review of systems. Now, with regards to review of systems and also physical exam, which we will see next, there are different behaviors within the system. We have auto copy, we have auto populate. You can have it be defaulting based on your complaint. So in this example for Jessica, notice I've already got my review of systems and it's already partially populated. I see I've got my eyes, my cardiovascular, respiratory, gastrointestinal selected, but none of the others. So this again falls into your workflow as to what your decisions are. If it's going to bring forward from the last visit. In the case of an existing patient, often that is what a doctor likes because there's not a lot of changes at this level. You've also got the option here of letting this be blank by default. Come up here to your copy button, which will bring up that patient's history. And then you can bring in the applicable review of systems template if you would like, because maybe the patient has been here for multiple things. This is entirely at your discretion again. Instead of auto copy or manual copy, of course, the template may also have defaulted based on your HPI complaint setup. Whatever the case is, if you notice here in the upper left, we have a template drop down. So if I would like now my detailed versus my follow-up, I can certainly change it at this level. Now for documenting my review of systems, since there's often numerous elements as we see here, you can individually go through each one as you're interviewing the patient. Or notice when I select a system, it automatically assumes denies. So I have these toggle options up here in the upper left of my labels. This one on the organ system level, if you watch below, when I click it, it selects every organ system and the default value of denies for every element. So in a single click, I can very quickly document all of those questions as denies. Now when I do that, I need to remember that based on why my patient's here, if there is something abnormal that she's reporting, for instance, since Jessica's here for a burn, she may have actual different issues here on her skin. So I might want to go in there and specifically document issues. And that is true even if you're using the auto populate or auto carry forward. If this had carried forward from history, or if I had copied one in, all of those answers would be displayed with a yellow color in the background to let me know I was reviewing information carried forward, but I could update them. And when I update them at this level, the yellow color will be removed to indicate I refreshed it during that visit. So with regards to efficiency of data entry, entirely at your discretion. Using all of those different features of auto copy, manually copying forward, choosing a default one, or using our toggle options over here. Now, one of the benefits of being within my green arrows, now that I've started documenting, when we first started there with vitals and HPI, we were just reviewing data and not changing, so I just clicked my arrow and went forward. Well, now, since I've actually inputted data, notice my save button is enabled. I do not have to waste my time clicking it, however, when I'm within my workflow. I'm simply going to navigate to my next screen, which is physical. Now what if I realize that I just said something wrong on the previous screen, or maybe I forgot something? Then I can click the arrow in the left to go backwards. It does automatically save data within the workflow. Now if I break out of my workflow and decide to look at something else, it is going to prompt me now, do I want to save my changes? So then my physical exam functions the same as the review of systems. It will default based on my setup at the complaint level, or based on if I'm using auto copy features, or I have the copy button where I can manually choose one. And I do have numerous physical template options as well, since all of these templates can be customized. You might have a general exam, a detailed exam, or a procedure specific, whatever's relevant to my scenario. Now, in conjunction with the physical exam, based on your specialty, some of you may like to include diagrams within your physical exam. If you hover your mouse over the physical option here on the Encounter table of content, you'll notice within the pop-up menu you have an option called Diagram. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and if you do diagrams, of course, all of these are customizable for your specialty. You'll see all the anatomical images are already part of it. So in Jessica's case, if we wanted to go ahead and document the burn, we can just choose whichever image is appropriate. Our toolbar is customizable as far as what we want to document. So let's say we want to document a rash, then I can simply draw on the image where that rash is. And once I am done, I can click OK to save all of my diagram images. This, of course, is covered more extensively in its own video. Now, since I executed that from my physical exam, I am still inside my workflow, even though it was not a separate screen. It was actually part of the physical. So now I can advance on to my specialty. Now, at this point, again, workflow is situational. If you're not doing anything on today's visit, you can skip through this altogether. If you don't do specialty at all in a follow-up, you don't even need to have it in your workflow at all. Of course, the specialty would be when you're doing something in-house. Maybe during today's visit you are doing a procedure or dressing chain. So we can go ahead and select our wound dressing template and document that. Of course, all of these templates are customized based on your scenario. And the important thing, especially those of you who have billing, anything that is above and beyond the evaluation and management as far as CPT and HCPCS codes for billing can be predefined here at the template level under specialty, so that when you decide to document a procedure, those CPT HCPCS automatically will go to the assessment and get transferred to the claim. So once we're done with our examination, the procedures if applicable, now we can bring up our evaluation and management screen to determine what we qualify to bill for. Now this again is a matter of convenience. It is a tool. It is not a requirement. Some physicians know their E&M levels and they don't really care about this step, so they won't have it in their workflow. Others like it because it's a check and balance. If you notice here in the blue, it shows me what I have actually documented so far on the encounter, and up here in the grid, it shows me what the requirements are for each level. So if I think my medical complexity down here in my pick list should be a moderate complexity, the system is going to let me know if I qualify to bill for that, and I do in this case. And I can go ahead and choose it at this level, and it will transfer over to my assessment for billing. So now when I get to my assessment and plan, depending upon the workflow you've chosen, you may have an ICD code here already that may or may not be valid, may or may not need to be changed, or it may be a completely empty screen and you need to choose one. So you've got these different options available here for your diagnosis selection. Whether you want to use the standard diagnosis search, use the patient-specific medical history diagnoses, or the complaint-specific diagnoses that you've predefined under your complaint master. So whichever function you want to utilize, you do need to bring in your diagnoses if they're not already here. Then we can go to our CPT HCPCS tab. Notice our E&M is there. The source tells me it came from my E&M tool. Now I could manually choose my codes here at this level. And notice that I am missing my wound code. So even though I documented I did a wound dressing, the codes are apparently not defined at the template level. So I can manually choose it by going into my plus sign. And notice now my source says AP, which indicates I made the choice as a human. So once you've got your codes present, now you can document your assessment observations if needed and your plan of care. And then document any procedures that you want to order for your follow-up visit. This, of course, can be free text, or, of course, whenever you have this binocular, you have your phrase master. Now, some doctors will think of this in terms as macros or smart text, where you can build frequently used documentation phrases. As you see here, I've got it broken out into categories as follow-up options, discharge instructions, consults. This is entirely subjective as to how you want to break this out and organize it. I actually have one called dressing and wound care under discharge. Maybe I also have my medications predefined. Maybe I also want to send her for nutritional counseling because she has diabetes. I want her to go to a walk-in clinic. Whatever I want, I can choose my phrases and it populates accordingly. If I want to order new procedures, send her out for a consult, an MRI, an EKG, I have the same option here of building my phrases. All again based on your workflow, your style as a doctor. Narrative fields also accept, of course, the dictation. So if you don't want a free text and you're using Dragon to orally dictate, or you're using Siri on your iPhone, you have all of those features available to you. I'm going to move on now to my prescription. So if I'm going to order a prescription, I have my two choices as to whether I want to do it individually up here at the top by typing in the drug name and updating my individual details, or by clicking my plus sign, which opens up my preferred drug master and also allows me to choose multiples. If I'm not ordering a prescription at all, of course, I can just skip this screen altogether. If I want to order labs, I can bring in my lab vendor, order my lab test if needed. Same with radiology. I'm just going to skip my radiology. It behaves the same way the lab does. So now I can review my progress note just to make sure I've covered everything, because remember, your progress note is automatically generated in real time as you're documenting. So now as I review my progress note, I can see everything that has begun since she arrived. I can see the patient intake details under HPI. I can review all of her face sheet level data, her vitals, review of systems, and if I'm using the abnormal functionality that could be turned on or off, you notice my abnormals are sticking out in red to catch my attention. If I realize at this point I forgot something or her speech really isn't abnormal, I need to change it. Since my title is hyperlinked, I can easily click that physical exam and go change my question and say that her speech is actually normal. Now here, since I'm outside of my workflow, I do have to click save before I return to my progress note. And again, since it reflects real-time documentation, as I scroll down there, I'm going to notice my speech is no longer sticking out in red as abnormal because I've modified it now to normal. So I have an opportunity there of reviewing everything. I can look through my plan of care, my procedures that I've done. If everything looks good, I can close my encounter, which is the end-all for a physician's workflow. Now, you may not be able to do this all in one setting, of course. Maybe you need to play catch-up at the end of the day or over the weekend. Keep in mind, however, for meaningful use, you do have to provide that clinical summary within 24 hours. Also, if you have our billing module, closing the encounter is what creates your claim. But if there is something else needed, maybe the patient also needs a vaccine today, an allergy shot, or something else that the back office needs to accomplish before you discharge her. So then up here in the upper right, you can change the patient routing status, ready for checkout, or ready for MA, or ready for nurse, whatever your scenario is. And click OK, and then at the end of the day, the nurse would go in and the back office workflow, complete those orders. Notice now on the face sheet, my Jessica Pearson, her status says process L&D. That means process lab, process drug. So while I move on to my next patient, the nurse is going to complete the lab order, complete the prescription, and then finally at the end of the day when this says done, because everything has been accomplished, now as the physician, I can go back in there and close my encounter. So I'm just going to click the Mark Encounter Complete sign off. And it's going to prompt me, do I want to provide the clinical summary for meaningful use? Of course I do, so I want to click yes. And I have my choices of putting it on the patient's portal, printing it, etc. Now at this point, it would not have prompted me if my staff member had already provided it, however. Now I did not have to click the Create Claim checkbox explicitly because notice when it closed my encounter, it did also simultaneously create my claim. Now if I go back to my home page just to show you the end all, my status shows complete. Complete means that the encounter is locked, has the doctor's signature, has created the claim. When I click her again now, you'll notice that her patient band across the top is charcoal gray to indicate that that encounter is locked. So if I need to make any corrections at this point, I would have to go down and do an addendum.